Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. In a move violative of Vienna Convention, Indian authorities on Sunday detained two staff members of Pakistan High Commission in New Delhi, charged them with spying, declared them persona non grata, and expelled them. The action has been condemned by Pakistan. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs summoned India's Chargé d'Affaires to register its condemnation. The Indian media, especially television anchors, chastened by Chinese People Liberation Army troops in eastern Ladakh, immediately lashed on to their favorite story, Pakistan and Pakistan's perfidy. About a week ago, the story was about a Pakistani spy pigeon, a repeat again of such ludicrous stories earlier. Some anchors in India have also been talking about the locust attack as Pakistan-sponsored. All of this could be laughed off, given how ridiculously stupid this is, if the intentions behind it were not so sinister. Consider, the Indian action has to be seen in light of what's happening in India. The government has come under attack for its inability to deal with the coronavirus crisis, the economy already teetering under Narendra Modi's government's failing policies is now going under. Minorities, specifically Muslims, are under attack with pandemic having been communalized. North in eastern Ladakh, the Indian Army was caught off guard and People Liberation Army troops now control certain strategic nodes that threaten India's strategic road link along the line of actual control. The Indian government has been trying to hide and downplay the developments, but information is slipping out. It's a huge embarrassment. India is now trying to work the mechanisms to somehow get the Chinese to fall back, but that's unlikely to happen. So what does Modi and the RSS media do? The usual: pull in Pakistan, create a diversion, whip up anti-Pakistan and anti-Muslims emotions, change the direction of the story. This is what happened last year in the run-up to Indian elections. An aerial defeat was used by Modi to his advantage, and the Indian public swallowed that nonsense hook, line, and sinker. The question is, how must Pakistan respond to show the nonsense for what it is? That's what we shall discuss tonight, and we are joined by Ayesha Farooqi, who's the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We also have with us Ambassador Tasnim Aslam, a former Special Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let me begin with Ms. Farooqi here. Ms. Farooqi, of course, we have condemned what has happened. So let's go beyond that. What are our options? Of course, one is, as people have been saying, as has happened previously also, a tit-for-tat expulsion. But as I said, this is more about the story. So what exactly are our options?
Well, as you listed, Ejaz, in your introduction, the actions in the last few months, if you see, of Prime Minister Modi's government today has been deliberately a propaganda against Pakistan has been unleashed by the Indian media, which is working in tandem and in collusion with the Indian government to malign Pakistan. So, as you rightly said, ridiculous charges of the spy pigeons and the imaginary launch pads and infiltration across the line of control. So a series of allegations have been made, and this is the latest in that story. Our two staff members in the High Commission were manhandled, they were tortured, detained for several hours, and then through the intervention of our High Commission in Delhi, they were finally released, and now they are back in Pakistan. So beyond condemnation, we have, through a sustained campaign, we have informed all the important interlocutors internationally also as to what the real design of the Indian government are vis-a-vis Pakistan, as well as in the broader regional context. And I think that is gaining resonance, and we see that there is agreement and a concern that is emerging now as to this, the India that we have today in our neighborhood, the policies that it is pursuing, and becoming a source of regional threat.
Okay, before I go further, let me just quote something from an article written by Amartya Sen, a Nobel laureate, Raghuram Rajan, who was the governor of Reserve Bank of India, and Abhijit Banerjee, another Nobel laureate. And they're saying the unexpected loss of income and savings can have serious consequences. Even if the meals are secured for now, farmers need money to buy seeds and fertilizer for the next planting season. Shopkeepers need to decide how they will fill their shelves again. And this article, in its detail, essentially is deeply critical of Modi government's handling of the economy and the corona crisis. And this is interesting that Yogendra Yadav, and I'm just putting this out because this is not what the Pakistanis are saying. I'm quoting Indians and eminent Indians. Yogendra Yadav, national president of Swaraj India, says insensitive would be too mild a word to characterize the shameful handling of the worst national level humanitarian crisis. To call the Modi government heartless displays credulity. As India goes for a free fall, the top political functionaries are focused on political intrigue, blame game, and public relations. India's worst health, economic, and humanitarian crisis is being handled by undoubtedly the most callous and perhaps the most incompetent government. Ms. Farooqi, these are voices from India. Are we making use of these voices? Are we telling the world that this is what the Indians themselves are saying about this government, and that this government has a past record of pulling in Pakistan both for domestic political reasons as well as to divert the world's attention from what it is doing in Indian occupied and annexed Kashmir?
Yes, indeed. We are very clear that these are diversionary tactics that the Indian government has been employing since many months. This is not just a matter of a few weeks. Ever since the Modi government got re-elected in last year, we have seen a series of measures that they have taken to further the Hindutva exclusionary agenda that they have at an accelerated pace. And this has been a constant talking point for us with our international interlocutors. And there are voices in the international community, whether it's international human rights organizations or the international media, who have taken notice of what I call BJP 2.0 under Prime Minister Modi.
Okay.
And the accelerated pace of, the agenda.
Stay with me. Let me pull in Ambassador Aslam here. Ambassador Aslam, you have obviously dealt with India. You've served in India. You've dealt with India for a long time. But before we go on to the politico-strategic part of it, just for the information of the viewers, given the Vienna Conventions, which deals with diplomatic relations, how exactly is a host country supposed to treat diplomats of another country, even if something wrong has been committed? Are they supposed to detain them? Are they supposed to torture them? Are they supposed to, eke out a confession from them? What exactly is the norm?
As Ayesha said, they were detained, they were tortured, they were beaten up, and then they, when our High Commission intervened, then they agreed to release them. So it's obvious that India has no regard for Vienna Convention, and they treated them in violation of all the facilities or privileges that are due to diplomats. But this is not something new. This has been a norm in India as long as I recall. India has mistreated Pakistani diplomats. They have tortured people. They have detained them for days. In this case, perhaps they were released the same day or maybe the next day, but they have detained people for days. And when they came back, they had torture marks all over their bodies.
Farooqi, let's talk a little bit about Eastern Ladakh, where about 60 square kilometers of territory has been captured by the PLA troops, and India is downplaying that. They've worked there, or they're trying to work their mechanisms to talk to the Chinese. Now, is this something that we didn't hear much about this in the Pakistani media? And I don't think there was any briefing also. Don't you think it's important that we should be talking about this? I mean, I did a program yesterday, but this is something that we need to be talking about, more frequently and in greater depth. But that would require good briefings in terms of what exactly is happening on the ground.
I think the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister both have spoken about this. There has been public articulation on the situation along the eastern Ladakh border. In a broader context, as I said earlier also, increasingly we see a pattern whereby India has violated established mechanisms and understandings and bilateral agreements with not just Pakistan, but now we see with China, we also see with Nepal. So increasingly there is a pattern now of violating, eroding hitherto agreements that had been made with neighboring countries and upending the status quo, upping the ante, so to speak, in the region. And that constitutes a security threat for the region at large. And Prime Minister's recent statement also, his conversation yesterday with his Italian counterpart also alluded to this, and he shared Pakistan's concerns with his Italian counterpart, and other. The foreign minister has written in depth and spoken to UN Secretary General, the OIC Secretary General, how this pattern constitutes a serious concern for not just Pakistan but also the other countries, and the international community needs to see this in a serious light and talk to India as to how its actions are posing a concern and a challenge for all the countries in the region.
Okay, I'm going to come back with an question, Ms. Farooqi, but let me go back to Ambassador Aslam. Ambassador Aslam, let's talk about the political strategic level. And as Ms. Farooqi said, she talked about Nepal also. India has problems with all its neighbors. It's even with Bangladesh, which probably is the most friendly government with India, has a problem with how they've dealt with the CAA and the NRC. So there's no neighbor that does not have a problem with India. That gives us the space to put out our story. Here is a state that is projecting power, that wants to create its own Monroe Doctrine, saying that we are going to reclaim these territories. They are showing these, and while they're so angry with Nepal for showing Kala Pani and Susta as part of Nepal, so I think there is a lot of space for us to take this story to the world.
Yes. Obviously, we can't expect the Western governments to take a very strong position on India, again, given the larger geostrategic interests. In the present crisis, on the one hand, there is China, which the US is now desperately, they are not on the best of terms, and even when they had very good working relationship, the efforts to contain China were always afoot. But in this case, we need to look at the genesis of the problem. Obviously, Ladakh never had a very clear demarcated boundary with China. And then what India did last year, on 5th of August, China did not accept it, and they rejected outrightly Indian unilateral action to bifurcate Kashmir and also declare it union territory. And we have to see it in the context of the present crisis, in the context of those developments. And lately, India was trying to build up military infrastructure in this area, which was a challenge to Pakistan. Coming back to your question about building a narrative, well, we have seen that Nepal 4 years ago was blockaded by India for 6 months. It is a landlocked country. We are reminded every time, even if we close border for a day for security reasons with Afghanistan, that Afghanistan as a landlocked country has certain rights, and we have, under international law, we are obliged to fulfill those duties to Afghanistan. But in the case of Nepal, when people there started starving, and Nepal, the government of Nepal was already exploring the legal option of taking India's violation of its rights to the International Court of Justice, the world did not say anything. And India has, and at that time, that blockade was to influence the constitutional amendments in Nepal. So India has, you're talking about Monroe Doctrine, but India has so belligerently and so openly and shamelessly violated the rights of its neighbors and interfered in their internal affairs for a very long time. And,
absolutely. It subsumed, I mean, if we go back to the history of Sikkim, and how it sort of, after Pandit Nehru's death and what late Mrs. Gandhi did, and how they subsumed Sikkim. Bhutan is essentially, for all practical purposes, a protectorate of India. It does not have communication, foreign or defense policies of its own. It has had problems with Bangladesh and so on and so forth. But Ambassador Aslam, stay with me. Before I wrap up this segment, I need to go back to Ayesha Farooqi here. Ms. Farooqi, the stress that about the narrative, I think it's very important. And I'll just give you an example in terms of picking up the nuances and putting them out. Now, Nepal is the only declared Hindu kingdom in the world, and Modi's RSS government talks about Hindutva. Now, one of the things that we have to do is to sort of bring out this distinction and to tell the world that the danger is not Hinduism per se, but Hindutva, which is a certain kind of violent fascist, ideology. The other point that I wanted to bring out, and you talked about the fact that the foreign minister and the prime minister have given these statements and the rest of it, and yes, I did see those statements, but what I'm saying is that if you look at the Indian media, it's the sheer volume of what they put out against Pakistan that creates a certain kind of din, and I think that is something that needs to be countered.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that distinction is very important to make. I take your point clearly. I think what many people do not realize, and what has changed fundamentally in India with Prime Minister Modi's government, is that we knew that BJP was inspired by RSS, but what we did not realize that how in the last few years RSS cadres have permeated every state institution in India, with the result that their philosophy, their majoritarian policies, and their agenda essentially has now the state is promoting it, the state is furthering it and implementing this agenda, which makes it particularly dangerous. And I think our leadership has spoken about this very clearly on various international forums. But this is something that definitely needs to be stressed and talked about in different forums through the media, because this constitutes a fundamental change in the India that we knew of the past. This is a new India, an India that believes that hate and fear are two of the most important tools to create that Hindu majoritarian country, which is very different from what you alluded to in terms of Nepal being a Hindu state, but of a very different complexion.
Absolutely. And another very important point, Ms. Farooqi, before I let you go, is the fact that someone needs to keep a close watch on how this RSS ideology is infiltrating into the Indian military, and how India's general staff, top officers, have been providing their weight to this RSS political government. And I think that has also consequences for how India is militarily behaving and its belligerence. But thank you so much. That was Ayesha Farooqi, the official spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, speaking with us. We'll take a short break and return to discuss India's violent oppression of Kashmiris. Stay with us. Back to In Focus. Indian occupation forces continue to operate in occupied Jammu and Kashmir with impunity. As always, the Indian story is that troubles in Kashmir are sponsored by Pakistan. The fact that Indian occupation forces are now not handing over the bodies of martyred freedom fighters to their families itself gives a lie to this. The policy has been adopted because every freedom fighter begets huge crowds chanting Azadi slogans and wrapping the body in the Pakistan flag. That is the sentiment of the Kashmiri occupied by India. The latest story being put out by India is the killing of 10 Pakistan-sponsored militants in the occupied part of Poonch. History is witness to Indian occupation forces killing Kashmiris in fake encounters and branding them as terrorists. The 2010 Machal encounter is just one example of many such extrajudicial killings. Once again, it is about the narrative, and as usual, Modi's tried and tested method is to drag Pakistan in. Once again, the question is, what are Pakistan's options? To discuss this, we still have with us Tasnim, Aslam. We're also joined by Iftikhar Gilani, a Kashmiri journalist and analyst based in Ankara. But before I go to the panel, with reference to the bodies, this is what Khurram Parvez, who is the chair of the Asian Federation Against Involuntary Disappearances, said to Al Jazeera from Srinagar. And I quote from what he has said, the main issue for the government is that they're very scared of the spectacle which these funerals create. And he goes on to say thousands of people come out and mourn these dead militants and rally behind them. They don't want to show people of India and internationally that anything is happening in Kashmir. So they are taking an excuse of COVID to implement a policy which they otherwise would not have been able to do. Iftikhar Gilani, give us a sense of Kashmir was becoming the big story, then COVID-19 happened. It's got the space, India's got the space to continue to operate with impunity in occupied and now annexed Kashmir. What are Pakistan's options? What are Kashmiri's options?
I can't decipher what Pakistan's options are. You have the panel for that there. But the fact on the ground is that it is now almost the 9th month. It's now 10th month now, it's starting almost, when the Kashmir is under lockdown. And whole world, actually after this COVID, whole world actually got the taste of what exactly the lockdown means. In Kashmir, it was a physical lockdown, it is a digital lockdown, and then a pandemic lockdown. All these three lockdowns, Kashmir has seen almost everything. And in this long, at least the world had that kind of a luxury. World had the luxury that they were actually digitally connected. Kashmir was even deprived of this digital connectivity also. And at least at this point of time, the world knows what the lockdown means. I think this is exactly what has to be reiterated, what has to be told to the world, that last 9 months, the people in Kashmir, almost millions of people in Kashmir, they are living the kind of life, they are living lockdowns, they are experiencing.
Absolutely.
The options.
Absolutely. Let me go to Ambassador Aslam. Ambassador Aslam, obviously, politically and diplomatically, we are doing things to put out what's happening in Kashmir. Obviously, we're a party to it. But let me go back to what we were discussing in the earlier segment, which is Eastern Ladakh. What we have seen is that India understands the language of power. And I think that is a lesson that we also need to learn when dealing with India. Give me your reading of that.
If you look at how India responded to Balakot, after the planes were shot down, the pilot was captured, India did not talk about taking it any further. Because they did not, when they started that adventure, they did not expect Pakistan to respond the way we did. So they backed off immediately. We have not had a war since Pakistan became a nuclear weapon state. That is, although they have talked about limited war and surgical strikes and all that, but they have not done it. But with China, the attitude is absolutely, totally different. I don't know if it also has something to do with not getting a very encouraging response from the US, because India has denied it and India has said that it is not interested in US intervention. But we understand from the Indian media reports also that some connections were made and contacts were made, and this was discussed. But obviously, the US is embroiled in its own crises. Apart from Corona, the civil unrest and a civil war-like situation in many states. So they are not obviously ready to. Although they would like India to continue to pose a challenge to China, but they would not like to get involved directly at this stage. So India has not only not responded, but they have also tried to play it down.
Absolutely.
And their officials are continuously saying that, no, this is not something that cannot be resolved diplomatically, and
they've also said Rajnath Singh record as saying that, well, this area, the boundaries are not clear and the rest of it. So yes, but they're absolutely playing it down. And I was talking to Ambassador Ejaz Haider yesterday, and he was, and as someone who was High Commissioner to India also and our ambassador to China also, he said that there's also a psychological thing and they're pretty scared of the Chinese. But thank you so much, Ambassador Tasnim Aslam, for speaking with us. We're also joined by Hassan Akbar, analyst and writer from Islamabad. Hassan, just to bring you up to speed, we're talking about absolutely ludicrous statements, programs being done on Indian media, the local Pakistan sponsored, the spy pigeons, and so on and so forth, is just to divert the attention from losing territory in Eastern Ladakh, from the economy reeling under the shock both of failed policies as well as coronavirus, and multiple other internal problems. My point then and my point to you now is also, what space do we have to actually put out the narrative about India to the rest of the world?
Thank you, Ejaz. Thank you for inviting me once again. I think Pakistan has a lot of space to put out its narrative on Kashmir and on what in India. The fact is that space has been provided not just to us, but also to Kashmiris and all other people in the region by the actions of Narendra Modi and the BJP government. Yesterday or day before yesterday, the Secretary General of the BJP, Mr. Ram Madhav, did an interview on BBC Hard Talk. And I think the world is slowly awakening to many of the concerns that people in Pakistan and Muslims and liberals in India have about the government of BJP, its fascist agenda, and the impact that it will have not only inside India, in terms of cow lynchings, attacks against Muslims and other minorities, the gruesome oppression and occupation of Jammu and Kashmir, but also about the impact that this expansionist and very internationalist government's policies will have on the region. And slowly we're seeing the impact of that. Now, India is having disputes, on the LOC with us, of course, on Kashmir, but we've seen a conflagration of their border issues with Nepal, and now with China. They've also been firing on their border with Bangladesh. So I think, slowly and gradually the world will awaken to the dangers that are posed by a government that is failing internally, whether it is on their policy of Vikas, platform of Vikas, whether it is their economic, initiatives which have flopped. The Indian economy is reeling. It was already before Corona. Many analysts were saying that growth rates were actually 0%. If you count India's, undocumented economy. And now, of course, it's reeling under more pressure because of unemployment. Their migrant workers had to flee Delhi. We also video footage of that. But, Modi has also failed in its policy of, reaching out to the regional countries minus Pakistan. He has also failed in trying to, placate global concerns about India's policy internally.
Absolutely, Hassan.
On all these fronts.
Hassan, hold that thought. I pull in Mr. Rajiv Desai, who has also joined us. Mr. Desai is a very discerning analyst based in Delhi. Mr. Desai, Mr. Yogendra Yadav, the national president of Swaraj India, says it's time for plain speak. Another day of yet another peak of COVID positive cases, another spate of reports about the plight of migrant workers on the roads and inside trucks, another day in office for imperious Finance Minister Nirmala Sitaram, bulldozing her way through hard questions about the economy that can no longer be set aside. Do you really think that at this time, when there's so many things sort of brewing, that the Modi government should be picking up spats with almost all the neighbors?
What can I say? The Modi government or this government is absolutely just not on target. They have no idea. They took a full-fledged steaming ahead economy and destroyed it. It's like a plane taking off and you shoot off its tires. Then they try to hide all that with diversions, whether in Kashmir, whether with the Citizenship Act, whether anything. And now they're utterly thankful to this virus, so they can blame everything on the virus. And the fact is that they instituted a huge and draconian lockdown, four lockdowns for 2 months plus, and they failed to get control of the virus spread. They pretty much destroyed the economy. The Indian economy has a huge informal component, which contributes about 60% of economic value added into the GDP. And that they've destroyed completely. And that's a support sector for the mainstream economy. So, they're just lurching from crisis to crisis. And today, Mr. Modi went before the Confederation of Indian Industry, where he started talking about reforms and investment. While there are migrant workers are on the road, they're dying. There are not enough trains to take them here, there, and everywhere. There's total confusion everywhere. And Mr. Modi talks about economic reforms. There was another guy, Piyush Goyal, I don't know what ministry he heads. He also talks similar things. It's also, they have no connect with the reality on the ground, that they've built up their fantasy called the New India. They call it the New India. And that New India is what they say it is, not reality. So yes, you're right. They've got relations soured with Nepal. They've got something going with Bangladesh. They've really cheesed off China. Now suddenly they want us to boycott Chinese goods. And they've distributed T-shirts saying boycott Chinese goods, and all those T-shirts were made in China. So I mean, it's complete confusion. So what do you do? I'm sorry, is all I can say. I'm a responsible Indian citizen. I love my country. I wanted to do well. I was proud of its prowess. But these guys in 6 years have pretty much dunked it underwater, and it's now gasping for breath.
Well, I know, I mean, but they sort of, their sales pitch was that they're the ones who are going to sort of, You talked about the prowess there, talked about masculinity. But on a lighter note, Mr. Desai, when you watch Indian television and when you see these anchors sort of shrieking and talking about the fact that there's a spy pigeon from Pakistan, that the locust issue is Pakistan sponsored, do you think, I mean, I'm sure you'd be laughing it off, but there is an impact of that on the public that's watching this. And it creates the kind of diversion that we were talking about from the real issues to something which is so ludicrous. Is this something that people are talking about? Is someone actually calling out the Modi government on these things and the Indian media on this?
Not in the media. The media are completely, and you know, the broadcast media on which I frequently appear are completely, not only they're vocal defenders of the Modi faith. Just today, or this week, they've launched a huge print ad campaign, which is, you know, you wonder, and it's the print ad campaign is in English and addressed to migrant workers and the poor of India in English, saying that we are doing everything for you. But that's ridiculous. It's only, then I thought about it, and I find it's just a way to transfer money to the newspapers so they can provide favorable coverage. So, you know, I have no idea what these, I've told you that 100 times on your shows. We have to just hold our collective breath until these guys just leave in 2024.
I wish I could share your optimism, Mr. Desai, but thank you so much for speaking with us. Iftikhar, Gilani, you were hearing Rajiv Desai. I mean, even the discerning Indians have thrown their hands up as far as this particular government is concerned.
It's almost I don't think that India, we have this, when if it's related to the Kashmir, I don't think there is anything new happening. We have seen the Cheti Singhpura massacres, we have seen those Patribal, those encounters, we have seen those Brakapora encounters. I remember that a Justice Pandian Commission of Inquiry was appointed, and Justice Pandian Commission of Inquiry, I think the only commission of inquiry which did its work and which did present its report and whose report was partly made public, had inducted a person on that massacre, and that person right now is the advisor of the government in Jammu and Kashmir. So what else impunity you can have? What else you can expect?
Absolutely.
And yes, and again, this is, and also I want to actually, since you had asked the question to the Tasnim, I want to go to this and this China. There is a marked difference between the issue China and the Pakistan which the India has. With the China, it is a boundary dispute. With the Pakistan, it is a territorial dispute. It's the people are involved in the dispute with Pakistan. And also in 1948, we have, I don't know whether unwittingly, it was a, what kind of, we delineated, they accepted the delineation of the ceasefire line. China has not accepted it. China has that boundary that yet remains to be unboundary, that yet remains to be undemarcated, that remains undemarcated.
Mr. Gilani,
and then we convert it to the line of control.
Mr. Gilani, unfortunately, I've run out of time, so I have to quickly hop over to Hassan Akbar here. Hassan, very quickly, the thing is that this is a part of the story that we have to put out, and I think this has to be done at multiple levels. Would you agree?
No, I totally agree with you. I think Pakistan is perhaps at this juncture the only country that is seriously talking about these concerns, which are shared by many Indians and which are shared by, I'm sure, the majority of Kashmiris in Indian-occupied Kashmir. But, the focus of our conversations should continue to be the aggression in Indian-occupied Kashmir. I think, with the domicile law coming in, there are concerns not just traditionally in the Kashmir Valley, but also in Ladakh and in Jammu about the future for employment, about the lands that these people, the Kashmiris, have traditionally owned. And this project of, frankly, fascist proportions of turning Kashmir into a settler colony with outsiders and businessmen buying off large properties. I think this is a very big concern for the world. It should be a big concern for the world.
And absolutely.
One of the jobs that Pakistan and all of our people have is to continue raising this issue.
Absolutely. And I
hope
think
for the
one of the
man-
important points Iftikhar Gilani raised, and I think that's a point that we have to constantly raise, is that while the Modi government is a fascist government and has done certain things in occupied Kashmir, including annexing it, successive Indian governments have treated Kashmir with oppressive tools, with coercion, and with impunity. Anyway, this is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.